Welcome everybody to another episode of Parent Like a Professional. Today we're going to talk about why sleep is so important, not only for your children, but for mom and dad as well. So some of the benefits, of course, of sleep, it's better health, obviously. You have a better day, you're in a better mood. And, those are the things that are just some of the benefits of getting a good night's sleep. And lucky for some, they don't have to worry about doing any type of sleep training for their children, but there's a lot of us who have children who have a very difficult time going to sleep. And that not only affects your child's sleep, it affects how you and your loved ones are sleeping in the house. So let's talk a little bit about why it's necessary and valuable to have quality sleep and how it's detrimental, for not only your child, but, of course, the parents and siblings when people are not getting a good night's sleep. For starters, it affects your immune system. It affects your immune system. So if you're getting sick or you are sick, it's going to be harder to recover or avoid, the common things that children are getting in preschool and in elementary school when they come home with everything that other children bring to school. Monica, Stephanie, can you guys give me some ideas of what you think might also be detrimental in not getting enough sleep?
I think like for the kids not getting enough sleep, if they're school-aged kids, just being able to perform well in school and like attending and being able to like focus on their schoolwork and all the stuff that comes along with, that's older, but that's 3 years old sometimes.
Yeah, and what's interesting, even 3, 4, 5, if you're having issues, at a very young stage and you think, oh, it's going to resolve itself, it might not. And that's why it's important to consider sleep training so that you really deal with this at a young age. So you're not dealing with it when they're getting into preschool or, starting kindergarten or elementary school. You really want to deal with it at the very young stages, especially, within the first couple of years at the least. So, and some of the other things that, I've been told in the past from other families that I've worked with is that, the children wake up and they believe they're having night terrors or they're having nightmares. And, it could be caused or sleepwalking or sleep talking. And, a lot of this could be caused to already a lack of sleep that is, pushing some of these other things that have been observed by the families that we've worked with. So, Monica, how do you know when you're ready to start some sort of sleep training?
Well, I look at how we know that the kiddo might be ready to start sleep training, which is that they're really exhausted or they're tired, and you can tell like from their irritability, they're not getting enough sleep. Even with nap times, you're just noticing that they really are just not getting enough. And if your routine is sometimes like chaotic or inconsistent, that could play, and you're not happy with that, and that's not something that's suiting your family or you well, or your child, that's another thing to consider, or you're going to want to do sleep training.
So like the inconsistencies are problematic. When we say inconsistencies, sometimes you're going in to check on your child, sometimes you're not, so sometimes you're reading a story and you give in and you read another story, sometimes you don't. So I think it's best to be consistent, which is part of the sleep training advice we would give once you start sleep training. So, the big thing too is like, how do you know your toddler's ready? How do you know you're ready? You're at the point where you're completely sleep deprived. Your toddler's tantruming, they're screaming and crying, they fall asleep, they wake up every couple of hours, you're waking up, you don't know whether or not you should go in there, but you're tired of going in, but you're worried about what they're doing there. You're worried if they're getting out of their crib or their bed. So those are all signs that, you're more than ready to start a sleep training with your family. So if you're tired of the tantrums or if you're tired of getting a lack of sleep, then I would highly recommend you consider sleep training and starting it at a very young stage.
Or like tired of falling asleep with your kid, like having to lay in bed with them. Like that's another, I think, reason, because it's interrupting your evening routine of having to get things done because you're laying in bed with them. And then sometimes you fall asleep as a parent because you're sleep deprived.
Yeah.
And really the big question is, if everybody knew and felt confident how effective sleep training could be, they would jump in and do it. I think that there's a lot of fears into starting some sort of sleep training. And so What do you, Stephanie or Monica, think are some of those fears in terms of starting a sleep training protocol?
I mean, I remember the biggest fear was their tantrums and their crying and just feeling like you're, abandoning them, or sometimes, that feeling of worry because they're crying so much. That was one of my biggest fears, I
Yeah,
know, jumping in.
huge. Huge, yeah, so you feel like they're in distress, when they're
Yeah.
screaming and crying, and then it gets worse. You can physically feel yourself, sweating, and your heart rate is going up, and you become really anxious, especially for mothers, where they feel like that biological attachment, to their child, and so it's normal to want to run in and save your child, but what's really happening during that time is that your child is expressing their frustration through their tantrums, and that's how they're communicating. And part of the reason why you don't want to go in and reinforce those tantrums, of course, when they're not in distress, is that you don't want to teach them that that's an effective way of communicating how they can get what they want. So for starters, don't feel that your child is distressed. Think about it more as your child is frustrated, upset with you because you're not giving them what they want, which is your attention. And eventually, as tired as they're going to be, they're going to fall asleep. But it's the first couple of days that make it most challenging. And of course, with the sleep training protocol, there's a lot more detail once you start the sleep training. But to put your mind at ease, the idea of the idea that they're in distress is probably how you're feeling, but the truth is they're just frustrated. So another situation or issue is that sometimes parents have this issue with this guilt, I should say, with setting boundaries, especially with young children. So, what are your thoughts on that, Stephanie and Monica?
I think I think what you were saying before, like as a mother, I think that just comes hand in hand with like you're supposed to be connected as a mom to your kid all the time, and then there's that guilt of maybe you're a working mom and you don't get to spend a lot of time with your young child, and now you're not spending, and maybe that sleeping with them was that part of that routine, and now you're having them sleep by themselves and you're not spending enough time with them, and it just becomes difficult, I think, as a working parent because you're not spending a lot of time with your kid and now you're sending them off to bed by themselves.
Yeah, I can see somebody might feel pretty guilty about that.
Yeah.
Monica, what are your thoughts?
Well, with the setting boundaries too, I also think about the self-soothing part of it. So I also think that on one hand, yes, I feel like you're saying, Stephanie, like a little bad about like letting them be by themselves. But then the way that I tried to reframe it a little bit was teaching them that self-soothing part of it, which you have to set the boundary of not being with them in order to teach them that self-soothing component. Because if you're there and you're soothing all of their needs and wants, then it's really hard to then, teach them that, that part of it. So,
Yeah. And another thing we were talking about earlier, we were talking about setting boundaries, we were talking about inconsistency, or trying to be consistent when working with your children. So sometimes you have other family members or other people in your lives that are involved with helping raise your children. And you might have grandma, grandpa, or your uncle or auntie that are doing things a little different. And inconsistencies are a huge problem, especially from other caregivers. So, the one thing that you have to really consider when you're starting the sleep training is that everybody's on board. And, the biggest part of having a consistent plan is that the fear of regression, once you start getting things going the right way, is normal. But the chances of regression are a lot smaller. The probability of regression is a lot smaller if everyone is consistent. And then over time, before you know it, you guys are getting a great night of sleep, and things won't be a lot easier for parents at that point. And so before you know it, you're going to get a better night's sleep, and it's going to be wonderful for everybody. So in our experiences with the families we worked with, and from our personal experiences, it's really important to tackle this issue early on and go through a sleep training protocol, if it's not ours, somebody's sleep training protocol, that you feel comfortable with, so that you can get a good night's sleep. Again, it promotes good health, and you're going to have better outcomes with everything that's happening throughout the day with you and your children if you get a good night's sleep. Thank you for joining us for this episode of PLP. Hopefully it's helpful. So if you have any challenges with your children falling asleep at night, we highly recommend you look at our sleep training. It's a week long, and it will change your life. Thank you, Monica and Stephanie, for joining us today.